"No, she doesn't have the right to even touch that M107, a voice rang out, equal parts anger and confusion. Yet in the corner of the armory, surrounded by the smell of gun oil and the cold glow of fluorescent light, she remained silent. A woman in her 40s, dressed only in a faded t-shirt, carefully inspecting every joint, every bolt of the rifle, as if she had lived with it her whole life. The young soldiers froze mid-step, half ready to laugh, half unable to look away. Because in that unassuming figure, something radiated like a buried secret. Was she really just a civilian staffer? Or a legend lying in wait? The metallic clack echoed sharply, bouncing off the cold cement walls. A few young soldiers nearby flinched, convinced for a split second that the heavy Barrett M107 was about to slip from the hands of the middle-aged woman sitting at the far end of the table. But no, the massive rifle remained steady in her lap, as if its 30-plus pounds were nothing more than a familiar object she had carried all her life. Under the harsh glare of the armory's fluorescent lights, her figure stood out in a way no one expected. A faded t-shirt, worn jeans at the knees, simple sneakers, no uniform, no insignia. Nothing that tied her to this world. To everyone, she was just a civilian employee, the one paid to oil the weapons, line them up on racks. Yet what unsettled them wasn't her clothes, it was her hands. When she tilted the Barrett, her fingertips slid along the chamber with a precision so effortless that one nearby recruit froze. He remembered his own training just last week, fumbling for 10 long minutes just to seat the bolt correctly. And here she was, completing the motion in seconds, no fumbling, no heavy breathing. Another click. Dry, decisive. She folded down the bipod, snapping it into place at the exact angle, as though an invisible ruler guided her. No wasted movement, no hesitation, only a seamless flow, and with it, the once noisy armory slipped into an odd, uneasy silence. A couple of the young men nudged each other, caught between laughter and unease. To them, the Barrett was a beast, an unforgiving weapon that even seasoned marksmen struggled to master. Yet in her hands, stripped of any uniform or authority, it seemed tamed, almost obedient. Every time her fingers touched steel, the air grew heavier. This was not the clumsy work of someone flipping through a manual. These were the movements of muscle memory of thousands of repetitions long past. Like a violinist lifting the bow after years away and finding the music still there, flowing from her fingertips. One soldier muttered under his breath, just quiet enough to think no one heard. She must have trained somewhere. But the words fell flat. No one responded. All eyes stayed fixed on the hands at work. She kept wiping. The cloth glided along the barrel, twisting smoothly, catching the light in cold streaks beneath the fluorescent lamps. Her shoulders stayed relaxed, her breathing steady, her eyes indifferent to the cluster of uniforms behind her. As if the room had vanished, leaving only her and the Barrett, an old relationship needing no explanation. And it was that calmness that unsettled them most. If she had fumbled, looked flustered, even smiled nervously, they could have dismissed her. But doing all of it as casually as sipping tea only made their curiosity burn hotter. She was someone familiar, and yet a stranger. A corporal leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, brow arched in suspicion and intrigue. He said nothing, but his eyes carried the unspoken question for them all. Who is she? How does she know this so well? In that moment, the atmosphere felt suspended, like a story cut short, like a note left hanging unresolved. No one knew whether to laugh or keep silent. They only knew one thing: what they had just seen could not be an accident. Because skill, once etched into the body, can never truly be hidden. And that question, like a spark, began to spread in the minds of every soldier present. Was this woman really just a civilian staffer? Or was she carrying a past the entire base had yet to uncover? The atmosphere began to shift when a young soldier tossed out a mocking remark, his tone half joking, half contemptuous. What, you planning to teach us how to shoot? The group burst into chuckles, boots thudding on the floor, rifles clattering against one another. To them, the sight of a middle-aged woman carefully polishing a Barrett was nothing but a farce. She didn't answer. She simply drew the white cloth slowly, firmly, along the barrel, steel glinting under the fluorescent lights. She sat there as if she hadn't heard a thing, or if she had, she simply didn't care. That silence made the laughter stumble, stalling awkwardly in midair. A tall soldier nudged his buddy, his grin still lingering, but when his eyes fell on her hands, fingers moving with rhythm, decisive, unnervingly confident, his grin froze. Something didn't add up. An outsider shouldn't know movements like that. The room, once lively, took on a strange edge. The laughter that had erupted now seemed like broken fragments, clumsy and out of place in the gun oil-scented air. Slowly, they realized the more they tried to mock, the more ridiculous they looked. She didn't need to say a word to answer them. Each twist of the bolt, each snap of a part locking back into place was like a silent slap against their shallow jokes. The crisp click of metal drowned out every attempt at ridicule. In that suspended moment, even breathing seemed loud. One young soldier, face flushed, tried to shatter the tension. He tossed out a weak jab, mumbling something about the rifle being heavier than the old lady holding it. But no one laughed. The words hit the cement floor with a thud, meaningless. Their eyes had already abandoned the jokers, all fixed on her, the woman with her hair tied back, posture steady, hands working as if welded to this weapon for a lifetime. In the pale light, beads of sweat dotted foreheads, not from heat but from the creeping realization that they were the clumsy, noisy ones. She was different. She was making a monstrous rifle look like a machine easily tamed. Moments passed. The room held only the scrape of cloth on steel, the soft spring of a latch, her steady breathing. The silence felt like anticipation, as if they were waiting for something. A move, a moment that would confirm what they were beginning to suspect. One soldier glanced at his buddy, shrugged, as if to say, "No way, just luck, just an act." But even he wasn't convinced. That calm wasn't performance, it was habit. Skill buried so deep it no longer needed thought. The longer the silence stretched, the tighter the air grew. Eyes flickered with unease, mixed with irritation. They wanted her to slip, to fumble, to give them a reason to laugh again. But the mistake never came. She remained steady, patient, eyes tranquil as still water. And that tranquility, that was the unsettling part. It wasn't loud, didn't demand recognition. Yet it posed a quiet question that made throats tighten. If she were just a civilian, how could she handle the Barrett with such familiarity? No one voiced it, but the question hung in the air, drowning out every echo of laughter. And in that strange moment, each soldier felt less like the mocker, more like the one being judged, tested by the very woman they had dismissed. Because some skills, once revealed, can never be hidden. And all of them wondered, was the real surprise still waiting ahead? Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. The chance came faster than they expected. On the training range, a moving target was dragged out at a distance of 1,200 meters, a range so unforgiving that even seasoned snipers hesitated, knowing a fraction of an error could send the bullet veering off by yards. No one thought she would step in. Yet, without a word, she lifted the Barrett as if it were nothing more than instinct. The metallic clicks echoed in the noisy room. The weapon came together in under 90 seconds, each part locking in place with the ease of a song she had played countless times. Her movements were decisive, flawless, like something drilled into her bones through repetition in the dark. Every pair of eyes followed, but no one managed to step forward. No one dared to stop her. She walked out to the range, her worn shoes sinking slightly into the sand. There was no urgency in her pace. If anything, there was a calm that stifled the whispers behind her. At the firing line, she set a cloth on the ground and placed the Barrett gently atop it. The bipod snapped down, locking into the hardened earth with a crisp sound. Her body lowered into the prone position, pressed against the hot, dry ground. There was no fumbling, no awkwardness. Shoulder, arms, cheek, every anchor point aligned with the rifle as if her body had been made for this. The younger soldiers didn't fully grasp it, but the experienced ones felt the truth settle in. This was not mimicry. This was a sniper's posture. She aimed. Time slowed. Her breath sank deep into her belly, heartbeat steady, unshaken. The wind tugged unevenly at the range, sweeping dust toward the west. She made a slight correction, eyes never leaving the scope. The world grew unnervingly still, leaving only the silent dialogue between woman and weapon. Then her finger pulled the trigger. Boom! The blast thundered outward, a deep shockwave hammering the chests of everyone behind her. The concrete walls threw the sound back, magnified like artillery exploding nearby. The rifle kicked hard, but her shoulder absorbed it, the barrel steady, as though fused with her body. Through the air, the massive round tore forward, a streak invisible to the naked eye. The 1,200 meters vanished in an instant. The distant target, no bigger than a pinhead to the human eye, shuddered violently. A sharp crack rang out. And then mercilessly clear, the clean, round hole appeared dead center in the bullseye. Not a hair off. The range fell into absolute silence. A few rifles slipped from young soldiers' hands, clattering to the dirt, but no one bent to pick them up. Someone swallowed hard, the dry sound loud against the taut stillness. Faces that had been twisted in smirks only moments before were frozen, wide-eyed, stripped of disbelief. One shot. Absolute precision. The moment split the air in two. On one side, shock and disbelief. On the other, a middle-aged woman lying calmly behind a massive Barrett, lowering it as if she had simply completed a routine task. There was no smile, no gloating in her eyes, only quiet. The wind gusted, scattering dust across the field, veiling the traces of the shot. And in that drifting haze, an undeniable truth stood clear. The woman they had dismissed as a civilian, a gun-cleaning old lady, had just demonstrated skill beyond many trained marksmen in the unit. One young soldier stumbled back, chest heaving. He recalled his joke from minutes earlier and felt as if he himself had become the punchline. Her silence, followed by this single shot, had flipped the balance entirely. No one dared to speak. No one dared to shatter the strange, suspended scene. Because they all understood, in just 90 seconds and one bullet, everything had changed. But the heavier question now lingered in every mind, pressing harder than ever. Who was this woman, really? Through the thick air, the silhouette of a man appeared at the end of the corridor. Black boots struck the concrete in a slow rhythm, each step echoing like a drum announcing something inevitable. The SEAL colonel battle-hardened, silver in his hair under the harsh sun, eyes sharp as blades. His presence tightened the already tense space another notch. He stopped at the threshold of the range and raised his binoculars. The lenses caught the glint of light, sharpening the view. The target at 1,200 meters, a perfectly round hole, dead center, as if measured by a ruler. Not luck, not a careless shot. A flawless strike. The binoculars lowered. His gaze drilled into the small figure still prone on the ground, beside the Barrett lying tame like a beast subdued. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Only the wind moved, sweeping up sand and dust. Behind him, the young soldiers who had just watched the impossible shot stood frozen, throats dry as if words had lodged inside. Then his voice cut through deep, clipped, carrying straight into every chest. "That's a 1 in a million shot." 7 words, but they landed like a judge's gavel. No more snickering, no more mocking. The air seemed stripped of oxygen, replaced by a silence heavy with shame. The eyes that once sneered now dropped instantly, avoiding the commander's gaze. Shoulders trembled not out of fear of him, but out of embarrassment at themselves. The woman slowly sat up. She brushed the thin layer of dust from her shirt, her hands still faintly scented with gunpowder. Her eyes were calm, not searching for recognition, not reveling in triumph. As if the colonel's words weren't for her at all, but just an objective statement. And yet, that very indifference forced the others to bow their heads deeper. A sudden gust tore through, snapping the flag overhead so hard it thundered. Beneath its shadow, the colonel's face shifted, first astonishment, then gradually respect. A man who had seen countless battlefields, who had witnessed the finest sharpshooters, now stood arrested before a middle-aged woman he too had once dismissed as mere support staff. No further explanation was needed. No persuasion. That bullet was the only report required, and the colonel's admission was the seal stamped in front of the entire platoon, declaring that the truth had surfaced. A few recruits swallowed hard, regret burning in their eyes. They remembered their jokes, the smirks, only hours earlier. Now every one of them felt clumsy, small. They no longer saw her as some mother out of place, but as a figure walked back from the battlefield itself. The Barrett lay quiet in the dust, its smoke long gone, but the echo of that shot still lingered across the range. They say a single bullet can change the course of a battle. Today, it changed the perspective of an entire unit. The colonel didn't step closer, nor did he need to speak again. His presence, coupled with that single line, was enough to carve the moment into memory. For the recruits, it was their first bitter lesson in humility. For her, it was simply another day, another task, though she knew the way they looked at her would never be the same. And then, as if to engrave it deeper, the range fell into such silence that each man could hear only the beating inside his own chest. But one larger secret remained. If the colonel knew who she was, what story lay hidden in the file behind this woman? Rumors spread across the base faster than the bullet fired the afternoon before. In a place where orders often had to be repeated 3 times before reaching every department, the question, "Who is she?" took only half a day to slip through every corridor, every mess hall, every cramped barracks room. The whispers no longer carried mockery. Instead, they weighed heavy with curiosity. They searched her records, but her personnel file contained only a few dry lines. Maintenance staff, civilian contract. No medals, no rank, no special notes. A resume so spotless it felt suspicious. Then fragments began to surface, passed quietly between the lips of the few old veterans still stationed there. Years ago, she had been a first-class sniper in the Marine Corps. Afghanistan was where her footsteps left the deepest marks. Skies choked with gunpowder smoke, endless barren mountains, nights so cold that metal cracked. Those were the places she left behind. More than 40 confirmed kills, locked away in classified files. In reports now gathering dust, her name sat neatly on lists of missions that never existed. Every bullet from her Barrett carried a story no one retold. An armored convoy halted in the valley because its commander had fallen. A group of young Marines saved in the final second by a shot from 1,300 meters. A secret tribunal where the verdict was delivered with a single round splitting the night. And yet, just when everyone thought she would keep climbing toward greater glory, the unexpected happened. Her son enlisted. That moment ended her combat path. She left the Corps quietly, leaving behind teammates filled with regret and questions without answers. She once explained it briefly with a reason so simple it was impossible to argue. "I want to be a mother, not a machine of war." For her, motherhood outweighed any medal, any glorious career etched into silent history. They say in those first days after leaving, she still carried the habit of cleaning a weapon each night, even though there was no Barrett left in her house. She replaced it with kitchen knives, with small household tools. Those hands refused to sit idle. The discipline forged on the range shifted to ordinary life. Once, a neighbor caught her carefully adjusting a door hinge, tapping each screw as though she were fine-tuning a scope. They laughed, but she only shrugged, half joking, half truthful. "I can't live without the sound of metal clicking." That decision to step away, simple as it seemed, never carried regret for her. She wanted to be close to her son, to watch every step of his service. Not to control, but to protect quietly, as a soldier used to living in the shadows, pulling the trigger only when absolutely necessary. And now, as the young recruits pieced together that past, they understood why every tiny gesture in the maintenance room, the day before, carried such mastery. Because those weren't skills learned hastily from a manual. They were muscle memories carved from thousands of nights on the range, from missions never written into public reports. Some doubted, if she really was a sniper, why would she return as an anonymous support worker? But the older ones chuckled softly. "You'll understand someday when you have to choose between honor and family." In the field hospital, she carried on with routine work, sterilizing scalpels, checking trays of instruments, preparing medication. But for those who knew her story, every bow of the head toward her was no longer simple courtesy. It was respect. Because they realized the quiet woman before them wasn't just a civilian worker. She had once been a piece of wartime history, a living witness hiding in plain sight. A SEAL Challenge coin now rested in her hand from the day before, but the truth she carried weighed far heavier. It wasn't in mementos, but etched into her body. The way she pulled the trigger without a tremor, the way her breathing synced with the earth, the way silence itself became her weapon. At night, recruits whispered, if she had over 40 confirmed kills, how many more were never recorded? That question lingered, haunting them more than any drill. And then, another curiosity grew, swelling with each day. They no longer asked only, who is she? But something deeper. If someone once walked away from the spotlight to hide in the shadows, what could be so great that it drove her to pull the trigger again, right before their eyes? The next morning, the hallway leading into the maintenance room echoed with the thunder of combat boots, but the familiar laughter and mocking remarks were gone. Young faces filed in one after another, their eyes cautious but steady, as if drawn by an invisible force. The room once reserved for a handful of technicians was now packed with SEALs. At the center, she was already seated. On the table, the Barrett stretched across an oiled cloth, its steel reflecting a cold, solemn light. She wore a faded coverall, her face calm, in stark contrast to the rising tension around her. The first to break the silence was the young soldier who had mocked her the day before. In his hands was his own Barrett. His fingers trembled so much that the metal clattered against itself. His face flushed red, his voice hoarse with nerves. No arrogance remained, only a short, clumsy but sincere request. How to control the weapon at long range. She didn't laugh, didn't shake her head, didn't mention the past. Instead, she nodded slightly, her hand guiding him through the smallest details. Set the bipod low to make the ground a natural brace. Drop the shoulder to absorb recoil. Press the cheek tight to the stock so the line of sight merged with the heartbeat. Her voice was steady, even, never imposing like water flowing through stone, gradually quieting the entire room. Every gaze was fixed on her. No one interrupted, no whispers of mockery. A few pulled out notebooks, carefully writing down each word. Others held their breath, following every motion. Each time a piece fit into place, their eyes lit up as if they'd stumbled upon a secret never found in any manual. The atmosphere shifted completely. If yesterday had been a stage for ridicule, today was a silent classroom. No blackboard, no syllabus, only a middle-aged woman sitting among a ring of young soldiers. In that solemn quiet, they realized some lessons couldn't be found in textbooks or official training. They only lived on through experience, through years carved into battlefields. Now every glance toward her carried no doubt, only quiet recognition. They understood they were learning from someone whose name history itself had once engraved in silence. Then, in the midst of that reverence, a figure appeared at the far end of the room. Each footstep struck the concrete floor with the weight of a ritual drum. The SEAL colonel entered, bringing with him a silence that made every spine straighten. His face stern, his eyes sharp as blades, every step carved authority into the air. He stopped at the table, his gaze fixed on the woman seated there. In his hand, a small object caught the light, a SEAL challenge coin, the emblem of honor that could never be asked for, only given when truly earned. There was no grand ceremony, no drums, no lines of soldiers. He simply advanced, slow but deliberate. When he stood before her, he spoke no lengthy words, recited no record of deeds. He placed the coin into her hand, closing her fingers around it with a firm squeeze, a confirmation beyond question. His voice rang out, low and clipped, but enough to fill the entire room. This isn't just for yesterday's shot. This is for all the years you chose to save lives, but still stood ready when needed. No applause came at first. Silence hung thick, so heavy it carried the sound of breathing. Then one clap broke through, followed by the rest rising to their feet. The same hands that had once trembled around their rifles now struck together, not loudly, not carelessly, but with reverence and sincerity. She sat quietly, the coin resting in her palm, cold yet heavy, as though it carried an entire lifetime within. She did not smile, nor shed a tear. She only looked ahead, steady as ever. But the young soldiers knew this moment would stay with them forever, an unspoken right, where someone once invisible in reports was finally recognized as an indispensable part of the unit. In the hallway, morning light spilled through the doorway, painting the gray walls in a new shade, no longer the shadow of doubt, but the light of acknowledgement. And in the hearts of those young soldiers, another question took shape, stronger than ever. If someone once seen as an outsider could now become their teacher, how many more untold stories lay hidden in her life? Late afternoon settled in, the last rays of sunlight slipping through the narrow window, casting long golden streaks across the cement floor still stained with oil from gun barrels. The weapons maintenance room had returned to its original state, quiet, unassuming, stripped of the heavy boots and watchful stares. On the table, the Barrett was gone, replaced by scalpels, clamps, and bandages. A familiar scene, as if everything that had happened was nothing more than a fleeting dream. She sat there, the faded coverall draped over a body weathered by years gone by. Patient hands guided a white cloth slowly across each surgical blade, every motion as meticulous as when she had cleaned the rifle's barrel the day before. Only this time, instead of the cold, thick steel of a weapon, it was the slender, gleaming metal of medical instruments. A peaceful repetition, yet still carrying the weight of life and death. Out in the corridor, a few soldiers passed by. No more shoulder nudges, no mocking glances. Each one paused mid-step, tilted slightly, bowed their heads briefly, then moved on. No words. Just an unspoken ritual, born naturally out of yesterday's moment. That acknowledgement, unwritten in any report, was enough to ripple across the base. She looked up for an instant, eyes calm as a still lake. No smile, no nod, just returned to polishing the instruments. Yet that silence was the clearest answer of all. To her, nothing had changed. Only to those watching did her world look different. In her pocket rested a small, heavy object, the SEAL challenge coin. Cold metal pressed close to her heart, carrying the weight of memory, of recognition she had never asked for. She didn't hang it on the wall, didn't show it to anyone. To her, it was only a quiet reminder. There was a time when it mattered. She had stood up. and no one could deny it. The day's final light spilled across the table, glinting off the polished instruments. She pulled the coin out, setting it beside the tray of scalpels. Metal and steel side by side, honor and life laid upon the same surface. A simple image, yet heavy with meaning. War and medicine, death and salvation, coexisting within one person. Outside, the training ground still roared with orders, boots pounding in rhythm, the relentless tempo of military life. But inside this small room, time slowed, leaving only the steady, repeated rhythm of cloth against steel. Like her very breath, steady, unchanging, as solid as a foundation stone. At times, when the light slanted across her face, the corner of her lips flickered with the faintest smile. So quick, so light, she herself didn't notice. Perhaps it wasn't pride, but peace. As if, after so many years, she was finally seeing the one thing she had never sought: recognition. A young soldier paused at the doorway. He stood still for a long moment, rifle still in his hands, not yet cleaned. Perhaps he wanted to ask something. Perhaps he wanted to thank her. But in the end, he only raised his hand in salute, crisp, solemn, saying more than words could. She lifted her eyes, gave a slight nod out of habit, then returned to the tools in front of her. Her world, though transformed in the eyes of others, narrowed back to its essence. A small room, a woman, and quiet work. But within that silence, a legend had taken form. People began to call her by many names. Some whispered, "She's the Barrett mechanic." Others said, "She's a living legend." But to her, such titles meant nothing. Everything remained within the same familiar cycle. Disassemble, clean, assemble, check. Whether rifle or scalpel, the principle was the same: precision, persistence, and silence. And somewhere, in the eyes of those who had witnessed it, a question still lingered, unspoken, heavy in the air. Was she truly just an ordinary nurse, or an anonymous legend, with the Barrett .50 itself the only one who knew for sure? And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.